took a little bit of break last week, although I phoned one in. I hope you guys appreciated the show that I provided for Thanksgiving. I wanted to do something a little lighter, so I featured a couple of main tracks from Murray Porter's two biggest CDs, and the one that I just ran this song off of, which is Stand Up. So that's what I did last week. I figured, let it play in the background. You don't have to listen to anything too intense. You just listen to some music. Although the thing that I like about Murray Porter is that his music has a message. So
he'll sprinkle it in there.
He'll sprinkle in there somehow.
Yeah.
Speaking of Murray Porter, well, I'm going to get right into part of our function here today. Is again, if you missed giving on Thanksgiving or giving on Giving Tuesday, we're back for you to give some more, or give more, or give for the first time. I don't know. We are always in need of the listener sponsorship. That's what we are. We're a listener sponsored radio, so this show is no exception to that. So I want to dedicate part of our show today to encourage people, especially the buddy program. That's one of the things that we're trying to push a great deal. And rather than getting into a whole lot of premiums and bringing in products for this show, I want to offer a few gifts just for becoming a buddy. So look, for the price of 3 cups of coffee a month, if you sign up to be a buddy at the $10 level, this is something I've offered before. I want to offer. If you're watching on Facebook, you can see it. I want to offer a hanging, an ornament, if you will, because of the holiday. I guess you can put it on your Christmas tree. It actually looks a little bit like a Christmas tree, but it's the tree of peace with a high belt below it. It is from Tuscarora Woodworks.
I love it, and I don't put it on my Christmas tree because I don't do all of that. But it can go anywhere in your home.
But if you do all that, you need to. I don't care. You can put in your wreath. I don't care. Hang it on your door. But I've got these hanging up all year long, so it's not a holiday thing for me. But I am offering it for those who will sign up at the $10 per month level. We'll send you one of these. Now, speaking of Murray Porter, what I've got Murray's CD, his latest CD, Stand Up. And what I want to offer this for is if you sign up at $20 or more, and the first 5. I've got the first 5 will be autographed Murray Porter CDs. So I would like to offer this. It is a great album. It is one that covers a lot of social justice issues. So again, I want to offer that. So that's to become a WBAI buddy. So here's what you got to do. You go to the pledge line, 516-620-3602. That's the number to call to you can make a one-time donation, but we're really trying to push the buddy program. I would love to have more people sign up. And again, in order to get the ornament and the CD, you do have to say that you're signing up in the name of of Let's Talk with John Kane and Shawnee Rice. You have to make that commitment to me to get the gifts. You're welcome to become just a WBI buddy and list just overall for the station. But if to get the goods, you gotta mention our show. So. I'd like to sign up 20 or 30 buddies. I mean, I know we're trying to, get each producer to sign up at least 10. I'd like to go more than that. So that's what I'm offering. I'm offering, again, the Tuscarora Woodworks ornament and for $10 or more, or the at $20 or more, the Murray Porter CD. And if you're among the first 5, you'll get an autographed copy of it. So
we also used to do really well with signing up buddies.
Yeah,
maybe like on our Monday shift, but we were leading for a while.
Yeah,
right?
and a few things, obviously happened. I mean, we had the calamity that took place, a couple of months ago now, sure. and I know some people perhaps were buddies, and they said, "Nah, I'm not going to do this if they're only going to play, Pacifica, across America." So, yeah. But if you were, we want you back. And if you were, and we can get you to sign up at a higher level, then that's great too. But if you want to make a one-time donation, that's what we're asking you to do. And again, you can go to the pledge line, 516-620-3602. You can also go online. You can go to www.give2wbai.org. That's GIVE, the number 2, WBAI.org. And there you go. You can you can even follow prompts to do it via text if you'd like. So there's any number of ways that that you can make a donation, and we just ask that you do. We just ask that you support the station, you support the program. Look, and I know I say this oftentimes, but I come to realize that I do get different listeners each week. Sometimes new listeners. I had somebody meet me downstairs at the Commons. They said they listened to the special I did last week, and they said they never heard my show before, and they thought it was great. They are also shocked to learn that I take an 8.5-hour train ride every Thursday morning. I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Actually, I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, but I got to catch a train at 4:30 in the morning in Buffalo, which is already about an hour drive from my house, and then I take a train from Buffalo, New York to Penn Station, and that's how I get here for my Thursday show. Then I turn around and take a bus back because there's no late train. So that's what I do. That's my commitment, and nobody covers that expense. So that's my out-of-pocket expense to doing this show. And some people say, that's crazy. Why would you do such a thing? I said, well, because it's New York City, and I get a chance to speak to you. And the fact that WBAI gives me the time slot, I'll take on the rest of the responsibility to get here and produce the show. So that's what we do here. Now, it's a shorter trip for you, Shawnee.
My commute is a 17-minute walk here.
What a terrible trip.
It used to be 2 stops on the train. Now it's 17-minute walk. So
all right, well, that's good.
I'm putting in all of my effort.
Well, I appreciate you being here. It's a much better show with you on it than not on it. So I appreciate that. We do have a topic that I want to talk about today, and we are going to take your phone calls. We're primarily in the second hour, and we are 2 hours. We're 3 to 5. So if you missed us when we went from 2 hours to 1 hour, well, we're back. So although I will say we are preempted next week. So next week we'll be preempted there, and we'll be back in this regular 3 to 5 slot. We'll even get our banner back up and that kind of stuff. We are in the new studio, so things are a little different. We're dealing with different lighting issues and all kinds of other things. So we're getting through it. Shawnee's really concerned about whether the daylight is showing too much.
The lighting in here is stupid, but you guys
daylight
don't care.
What do you mean it's stupid?
They don't care.
Yeah, we're staring out a window. We're staring out over Atlantic Avenue, so it's kind of it's a nicer environment. But I'll tell you, just before we went live, Actually, I think we were live. We hadn't started the show yet. The sun started reflecting off of the buildings across it, and it looked like I was just being blinded by the.
Well, we're also going to watch it turn dark, like our show. It'll be dark by the time our show ends.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so we'll see. We'll work through it all. But
yeah, we'll manage.
I do like the new digs, and we'll see how this goes. Now, here's what we're going to talk about today. And I know every time I talk about racism, it gets people riled, and I don't mind getting people riled. So, but here's the thing: not all racism is white hoods and white power and white supremacy and swastikas that's racism. Confederate flags, that's racism. But most of what people of color experience is a much more subtle variety. And it's institutional. And so what I want to talk about is how, although it may seem subtle, and when you look at it piece by piece, it seems small, but there's a cumulative effect. First off, let's start from the beginning of the United States. When they suggest when the white men, founding fathers of the United States, started crafting their foundational documents like the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, all that other stuff, they were always talking about white men, that all white men were created equal and are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, including the right to pursue happiness and all that, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They were talking about white men. Now, how do we know that? Well, because they were all slave states, and they. In a few lines down from when they mention this in the Declaration of Independence, they refer to Native people as merciless Indian savages. So we aren't considered equal to them. We aren't them. We are different people, and we aren't included in their foundational documents. And
we're not 5/8 either. So
yeah, or 3/5 or whatever. And,
it clearly is meant for white men.
And women are completely left out, and would be left out for 100 years. I mean, not even mentioned. It's funny because they refer to persons for enumeration, but they don't refer to women in terms of having rights. Just you're just a warm body. We're going to count, and of course, black people they count as 3/5 of a man, and of course, Native people weren't counted at all. But so the foundational documents are clearly skewed towards white people. Now, many will argue, yeah, but that was a long time ago. You guys got to stop living in the past and that kind of thing. Well, here's the problem. If you look at the makeup of Congress or the president's staff, it still looks an awful lot like all white men are created equal. They're not a whole lot of color there, and there's not a whole lot of gender variation either. So the legacy of creating a foundation of white supremacy doesn't just go away because you think you can tweak a document here and there. I mean, if you look, and look, I even sat in on a racial diversity session with the NPR station back closer to home in Buffalo, and they acknowledged that, look, we don't have any people of color they got a pretty big news staff, but they don't have people of color. They only have a couple. I mean, in the overall scheme of things, when you look at the breakdown of, in
Buffalo,
in Buffalo, you look at the proportional breakdown, you would think there would be more black reporters, and there might be a couple of Native reporters. You would think there would be more people of color from the various peoples represented by the broad population, but that's not the case. And why? Because the institution. And here's the thing: even the people of color who are on radio or TV anywhere, if you notice, they pretty much sound like white folks. There's all this, the hair thing, especially for women. I mean, Native people, we get it too, and I'll talk about that specifically. But think, how often do you see a woman reporter, a black woman reporter, who has natural hair? I mean, look at Michelle Obama spent 8 years in the White House, and trust me, she had work done on that hair to keep it straight and flat and all of that other stuff. Look, and I'm not condemning the look. I mean, I'll tell you a story. You know the story I got in trouble with. Remember who Paulette Jordan was?
Are you talking about on your Facebook? Because I remember that.
Yeah, Paulette Jordan. She was a Native woman from. I want to say she was from Coeur d'Alene. I could be wrong there, but she was running for the governor of Idaho, and she was Native. She used to sit on council, but she's Native, and by all accounts or any account, she was a pretty attractive Native woman. I think most Native women are pretty attractive, but she was pretty attractive, and I'm not trying to get misogynistic here, and all of her campaigning, she had her on horseback or with the open scenery in the background, maybe mountains, her long flowing black hair, her dark skin, and that was all of her campaign photos, all of her commercials. They all looked that way until about 10 days before the election. Now, before I even get too close to the election, keep in mind that she was running as a Democrat. Idaho is the seventh whitest state in the United States. They hadn't had a Democratic governor since in almost 30 years, 25, 30 years. So she had a pretty uphill climb, a big uphill climb to even attempt this. But about 10 days before the election, she cuts off her hair and lightens it. I mean, really lightens it. I mean, almost blonde lightens it. And you know what? She was still attractive. So don't get me wrong. But somewhere along the line, somebody said, you know what? We need to get more of that white vote. We got to take some of that Native out.
Well, attractiveness has nothing to do with what you're saying, but I agree with what you mean.
Well, what I'm saying, I'm not criticizing that she looked bad. That's what I'm trying to say is the change in her hair, Michelle Obama's hair. I mean, it looks nice, but let's face it, there's a certain level of accommodation that goes on with some of this. And women are put under the microscope even more than men. So, and I wasn't trying to put her under the microscope. I was just acknowledging that, is it me or is Paulette Jordan looking whiter the closer it gets to election?
Well, I think you should frame it as is this her self-autonomous decision or choice, or is this because the amounts of pressure it is to get votes?
Well, and that's where
she can be Native and she can bleach her hair and cut her hair. Who cares? That's
Absolutely.
her choice.
I know a bunch of Native women with purple hair.
Right.
All of it. So,
but
blonde hair, the whole bit.
The pressure for institutions, especially when you're a part of one, to change your look is is immense. And although like this is the thing that people will say, well, it's 2019 and nobody's that racist where you can't have your natural hair, but the reality is like this is what you
They've had to pass
what
legislation to address dreadlocks. I mean, come on.
or
all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy, and there's still such a stigma associated with natural looking hair, and and as a native guy, trust me, the ponytail thing is still one of those things that sticks out for people. And although I don't get a great deal of pressure to cut it, it's one of those things that is still opposes the norm, right? And so it's there. So, and again, I don't want to spend the whole show talking about hair, but when you talk about the cumulative effect of institutional racism, so look at any state legislature. You don't even have to keep it in the United States. Look at the Parliament of Brazil. In spite of the fact that the vast majority of the population are people of color in Brazil, it don't look that colorful. There's not that much color in their parliament. So when you go back to the United States again, Congress is primarily white. And look, I know there's some black folks in there, and there's some people of color, and a couple of Native women, a couple of women, of Islam, all that stuff. But the vast majority are white men. Senate, same thing. And if you look at the president's cabinet, or you look at the president's, yeah, I know that one guy got elected and he was darker than the rest and had a funny name. So yeah, and I get that, but that's the exception. And look what that did. That swung the pendulum so hard the other way. You got Donald Trump for crying out loud. I mean, so this is where, this is embedded in I don't want to say in the American culture, but in the white American culture, because these things don't change easily. Women still can't make as much money as men. I'm not saying a woman can't, but across the board, they don't. If you're a person of color, you're not going to make as much money as somebody who's white.
It's also a matter of who has the right to grieve, which is clearly it's white men and it's white institutions. Because like we've talked about many times on the show before, you're never going to tell New York City to get over 9/11. And if you drive past any police station in New York, they have never forget, rest in peace, an officer who died, which anybody who died, memorialize them in whatever way you see fit. But the problem is that you can't question that. You can't say, you can't tell them to get over it, because then you're attacking all that is patriotic and all that is supposedly the United States. You also don't tell Jewish folks to get over the Holocaust. Right. And those things are unshakable, unquestionable, because it's white folks. It's a white issue that they're dealing with.
Right.
People of color, black people in slavery, Native people in land issues, or boarding schools, all of that. That's when you sort of get, or Muslims even with the ban. It's happening, all the time with this presidency. But that's when we get those statements to get over it.
But my point here is this isn't even just about getting over it. My point is the stuff carries forward. So, the fact is that we can't get over it. We can't get over the fact that there are biases built into everything from the media. And look, this isn't right or left. This isn't, fake news or anything else. I'm not going there. But you don't, to the extent that you have people of color in the mainstream media, they've already been channeled in to conform with what has been established by white people. So whether you're talking about legislators, whether you're talking about the president, whether you're talking about judges, whether you're talking about lawyers, the entire legal system has been created by white people, for white people. Now, I'm not saying that we can't use that system, but the thing is we have to conform to the system. And so even as Native people, every time we hire these great law firms from Washington, D.C. or whatever else, they're going to tell us how to work their system. That they don't represent us as who we are. They represent us as, well, let me see if our laws have been unfairly applied to you. Well, what about whether they should be applied, period? Yeah. See, the whole system, and it might be subtle, but when you take the cumulative effect of what our kids are taught in school, everything, the fact that Native people are treated as if we were just a period of history, or that slavery is just washed over so quickly. If you don't address these things properly, then you have the sense that, yes, there was a problem, but it's fixed. And now, Lies My Teacher Told Me by James Lowen. That's what he said. All these history books treat every issue to the extent that the United States was ever had problems, that they solved them and we lived happily ever after. Well, the fact of the matter is we still have inequity. If you look at poverty, it runs right along racial lines. Well, there's a reason for that. It's not because God created poor people, black people intended to be poor. It's the system. So that's part of what I wanted to talk about. And then, we can bring it a little bit farther forward by talking about things. I did my last show, Donna Fan Boyle was on with me back home, because Neshaminy High School, which is a white village, a white community, in Langhorne, Pennsylvania, they still call themselves the Redskins, and they refuse to acknowledge that it's problematic. Even though states are banning the use of Native imagery and mascots, the dictionary defines that word as a racial slur. It's no different than calling somebody black skin or the N-word. I mean, the idea of throwing a bunch of red paint on your face to go to a football game is no different than going in blackface. But so this is taught in school that it's something. This is the way to celebrate your school is to mock Native people. So that's today that this is happening. They even had the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. They actually hedged a little bit. They said, you can keep the name, but there's certain conditions that are going to go along with it. You're going to have to educate your people. You're going to have to make sure that you're not advocating or advancing negative stereotypes, which I don't know how you can do that since the word is a negative stereotype.
Who said they can use it with?
The Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. They did this long. Remember Donna was on, we talked about this whole hearing and everything. Well, they made the ruling, and they said, they said, well, we'll allow you to keep the name, but here are the conditions. But you know what? Neshaminy said, hell no. We're not. If we can't keep our racist name without conditions, then we're going to fight you. And so they appealed it. So they even got permission to keep it, and they still appealed it. And
because they have to they don't want to carry the weight of having
they said it would cost us. They said it could cost us $1 million to fulfill the commitments that the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Well, they'd have to teach. They'd have to teach about Native. They would know. They'd have to. And they were probably going to have to change. Frankly, they're probably going to have to change the name anyway. But they were going to have to change logos that were negatively stereotyping or were inaccurate to what the Native population would have been there. There's a whole lot of things that
So they can keep the logo, but they're going to have to redesign it?
They could have kept the name, but their logos, they had to prove that their logos were not negative stereotypes, were either buffoonish, cartoonish, or in any way. It was a stupid ruling as far as I was concerned, because I don't know how you could say keeping the name doesn't promote a negative stereotype, since it's a racial slur.
I don't even understand how they justified keeping the name.
Well, here was the argument. Here was the argument some of the folks made, and they said perhaps this was all about giving this Neshaminy High School enough rope to hang themselves, giving them a way out, and still seeing that they would oppose it. I don't buy the whole thing. But anyway,
so confused.
Again, my point with this whole thing is, and we can talk about where this mascot issue comes from, because here's the crazy part about Neshaminy High School, Langhorne, Pennsylvania. 2 hours down the road is Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Oh. One of the most famous Indian boarding schools in the United States. It didn't operate the full 100 years the way other schools did, but it operated for 50 or 60 years. It is where the expression "kill the Indian, save the man" was coined by the school's superintendent, who was he reached the rank of general, but he was like lieutenant or captain or something like that. His name was Pratt, and he coined the phrase, "kill the Indian, save the man," because there they prohibited Native people from demonstrating any semblance of their identity, while 2 hours down the road, little white kids they got to call themselves Redskins. And they got to put makeup on, and they got to dance and war hoop and beat their oatmeal canisters as if they were, mocking Native people. So this is the part that what I'm saying is that these things might be subtle, and here's here's what the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission said. It says, well, we saw no evidence that there were any Native kids at the school who were hurt by it. Well, you know why? Because there's barely any Native kids there, and the ones who did already feel so persecuted that they weren't going to speak up.
That doesn't matter. You don't get to just
come
be
on.
like,
You're the one Native girl. You got to tell us everything about being
Native.
Native
Or not. It's like when my history teacher when I was in high school said the N-word, and I was offended because I'm like, you wouldn't have said that if there was a person of color in this room, period, because nobody could come after you. And your stance that you should take as an educator, as an adult, is like, if a person of color is in the room or not, you need to keep the same ethics and standards.
It for your students that they could say that, and it's the same thing with the R word or anything else. I mean,
makes sense.
And so when I hear something like that, so if you've got a closed group of white people, you could say anything you want. Apparently, you can wear blackface, you can wear redface, you can use N-word, you can use nigga, and get away with it. We've heard a few instances of teachers trying that one too. I mean, it's really absurd. But see, this may not seem like the blatant, card-carrying white power racism, but this is still there. And many people of color, and I'm not just talking about black people and Native people. I mean, I don't care if you're from a Muslim country or if you're from South America. I mean, you are going to hear all of this stuff. I mean, let's face it. The word American has come to mean white people. How do you know that? Well, because if you're black, you're not an American, you're an African American. If you're Native, they want to call you a Native American or a Mexican American.
The questions, but where are you really from?
Yeah, but where are you really from? Yeah. So it's when you say American, the default is that you're talking about white people. And even though America is like an entire hemisphere, it's two continents, right? But this word has been, white people own it. And in fact, to make sure they own it, we've got to stick another word in front of it. I mean, here's the one that really amazes me is that nobody says Puerto Rican American.
Well, isn't it because Puerto Rican's a part of America?
Well, you would think that's it, but they always try to distinguish. Are you American? No, I'm Puerto Rican. Or you're not American, you're Puerto Rican. When Sonia Sotomayor, I say this all the time because this is NPR. When Sonia Sotomayor was nominated for the Supreme Court, NPR, and I don't remember what show it was, but they would define her or identify her as the daughter of Puerto Rican immigrants. Well, how the hell could her parents be Puerto Rican immigrants if Puerto Rico was part of the United States? Immigrants to where? Another country? I mean,
that was All Things Considered. That was the name of the show.
Yeah, All Things. Yeah.
Yeah, All Things Considered.
All Things Partially Considered. Well, including racism, apparently. So, but no, that. So, I guess part of the whole thing is to understand that when you talk about how banks being run, primarily by white people, when you talk about the media being run by educators, the people who write textbooks, when you think about how much there is an overabundance of white influence, that's where the racism becomes institutionalized. Because all of the major institutions that people think of, so whether you're talking about, again, financial, judicial, legislative, media, even not just news media, but entertainment. Look what Hollywood does. I mean, when you consider what is being done, and again, primarily by white men, it has a cumulative effect. And and I've talked about the doll test before. And again, if you've never heard of what the doll test is, the doll test is a test that's been repeated many times. I know that I've seen at least 5 different examples of the doll test. One where it was reduced just down to cards. But here's what the doll test was. You took children, young children, like 5, maybe 6 years old, and you presented them 2 dolls, a black doll and a white doll. And you asked which was the good doll. Now the white kid said, "Oh, the white doll's good." And which is the pretty doll? The white doll's pretty. And which is the
clean
doll?
And dirty.
Yeah, which is good, dirty. All the yeah. And all the white kids picked the white dolls. But you know what? When they asked the black kids, They said the white doll was prettier too. They said the white doll was good. They said the only difference answers they got was when they asked the white kids which doll looks more like you. The white kids said the white doll. When they asked the black kids, they said which doll looks more like you, and they said the black. So these little kids, even before having much influence at school, just because of society, because of the institutions around us, everything that they witnessed, have already already adopted their own prejudice against the dolls that look just like them. So when I hear people say, "Well, this cop, death by cop thing, you can't blame it on race because one of the cops was black." Well, if you consider the doll test, they've been institutionalized because black cops are also conditioned to believe that the black suspect is going to be more likely be guilty and violent and all that other stuff than a white suspect. That's the world that we live in, because there's a cumulative effect of all this stuff.
But it's interesting because when we're talking about race as like a concept, it's hard to apply it in terms of like a cumulative effect,
right?
Because we don't disagree that the cumulative effect of things of like child sexual abuse, domestic violence, opioid use, like these are very clear ways in which we prevent the future from being harmed by these concepts that we're seeing as kids. But when it comes to racism, it's specifically, I don't think that's real enough to impact the history, or this must be like something that there are people of color are making up because they want something in terms of like.
What ends up happening is there's
even
ends up being this,
women and gender.
This other way of saying, well, there's a reason that women don't make as much money as men. They aren't worth as much. Or there's a reason that there's more crime in a black community than or there more black men are in prison than white men. Well, because they commit more crimes, and so they make these deductions that are oftentimes completely inaccurate because they're backing out the result of institutional racism as justification for whether it's white supremacy or white male supremacy, and and of course it ignores the biology, it ignores science. It only tries to look at correlation instead of causation. And when you talk about cumulative effects, now you can see where causation comes from. And so when you have people who have been who not only were enslaved or massacred, and you say, yeah, but that was in the past. Yeah, but what has changed? And what has changed since then? Because here's the other problem we have. Because we aren't being enslaved and massacred anymore, blatantly, it's like, well, things are better now. Well, they're better than that, but they're not better yet. I mean, we still haven't gotten there yet. We still haven't reached equity or equality. And so when people talk about genocide, well, no, Somalia is genocide. We'll talk about genocide in other places, but we'll ignore the fact that this cumulative effect and the imposed assimilation that is still going on. And I'm not just talking about, again, Native people. Like I said, what do you have to be successful in many of the professions, the professional services? If you're black, you've got to conform. You've got to sound white. You've got to dress white. You've got to do everything in your power to conform beyond beyond being able to change your skin.
I mean, and this isn't like opinion wise. Like if you search,
no, this is a matter of fact.
If you search the most wealthy, if you search all of the CEOs, like of course there's going to be women, other trans folks, and people of color, but not many, by far in comparison. And who's holding all of the old wealth and the new wealth? That's all within white males.
Yeah,
That's like not something that we're just opinionated about. If you don't believe it, look it up.
Hey, let's. We've kind of breezed through the bottom of the hour. We're still getting used to trying to find a clock here. I can't see through Reggie, but we blaze through the bottom of the hour. So we'll take a break here. We'll go on a song. When we come back, we'll start to take your calls, even though we haven't reached hour 2 yet. We'll begin with your calls after we come back from this break. This is John Kane with Shawnee Rice, and this is Let's Talk.
someday I'll never learn. Someday I'll never learn. I'll hit the fire's hand. I'm the one that got burned. Sometimes I feel alone in the middle of the night. But I ain't no fool. My mama raised me right. But I know, baby, I know you ain't treating me right.
All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane and with Shawnee Rice, and we are Let's Talk. So we're going to go to the phone lines, but before I do that, let me again remind people that we are in fund drive mode. So frankly, in one way or another, we're always in fund drive mode. We always need your support. So whether we're in a fund drive, whether we're doing a special, whether it's we're trying to hitch up on Thanksgiving or on Giving Tuesday or whatever else, we are listener supported radio. It's the only way that we function. So I'm not offering a premium, but I am offering some gifts, and the gifts are associated with becoming a WBAI buddy. So if you become a WBAI buddy, which is a sustaining member, that means you put your credit card information or your checking account information, and you make a donation of X amount of dollars per month. If you do $10 a month, and that's just 3 cups of coffee. I mean, that's look. Some of you guys would buy me lunch that would cost more than that. Trust me, a lunch for me is more than that. And I'm only asking you to do this once a month, so if you do that once a month at $10 or more, I'll send you this piece from Tuscarora Woodworks. It is it's a tree of peace on the back of a turtle with the Hiawatha belt, 3 major symbols of what Haudenosaunee culture is about. You can use it as a Christmas ornament if you like. You can hang it up on your wall, put it in your window, makes a nice shadow. It is my good friend Robert Delamonte from Tuscarora is the designer and the creator of these things. I bought a bunch of them just for this purpose. Again, I bought them to give to you. So if you become a WBAI buddy for $10 per month or more, I'd be happy to send you this. Now, if you want to do $20 per month, and I'd like to send you the CD, which has the music that we play a lot on the show, Murray Porter CD. It's called Stand Up. It is one of his best works, and it has a bunch of songs that are associated with various causes, missing and murdered Indigenous women with Highway 16. The Water is the opening track, which obviously talks about water being life. No More, which is almost like the title track because it talks about standing up. It's got a great song associated with suicide prevention. It is a very, very good CD. And if you become a WBAI buddy for $20 or more, and if you're the first 5, we'll send you the autographed by Murray Porter autographed CD. So that's what I'm pitching. I look, you can go to the pledge line. You can go to 516-620-3602, 516-620-3602, and you can make a donation of any size. You can become a WBAI buddy for almost any amount. But if $10 or more, we'll send you the ornament, and for $20 or more, I'll send you the CD. But we need your support, and we need it always, not just when we're in fund drive mode, but this is, again, these shows as we close out the year, we're making a bigger appeal, especially coming through some of the calamity they went through with being off the air for a month. We're trying to recover, and we're trying to improve our product. We're in our new studio, so we're asking for your help. We're asking for you to support. I'm not asking you to make as big a commitment as I make on a weekly basis to come here, but I am asking you to step up and make a donation. If you're already a WBAI buddy and you want to increase that a little bit, I'd appreciate that too. If you were a buddy and you've got a new credit card with a new expiration date, you probably got to call in and update that as well. So anyway, that's my pitch. I'm really hoping that people will go to the pledge line. It's 516-620-3602, or go online to www.give2wbai.org. That's GIVE, the number 2, WBAI.org. And there you can follow the prompts to do it all online. You can follow the prompts to do a donation via text. Whatever is easiest for you. We try to accommodate you in any way that we can, because we got our hat in our hands, to you guys. So we're hoping that you'll support not just the program, but support the radio station. I'm sorry. All right, let me give the pledge the phone line, the studio line in, because I'd like to get a few callers in before we take a break at the top. The number's 212-209-2877. Same number, 212-209-2877. Look, I know anytime I talk about race or racism, there's a knee-jerk reaction from, especially from white folks, to say, well, wait a second, that's not fair. We're not this and we're not that. I'm one of those folks who, coined the phrase that, for those who are real quick to point to the Republicans or the right, and they say, well, yeah, that racism is their hallmark. Well, I say racism is not just a right thing, it's a white thing. And that automatically gets people saying, well, you say all white people are racist. No, I didn't say that. But I will say you all benefit from racism. And that's what white privilege is. All of this cumulative effect stuff that we were talking about. See, you don't have that same thing. And I'm not saying that we don't all face challenges. So look, we face challenges with our station in life, where we're born, whose family we are, whether we're born into wealth or not, which side of the tracks we live on sometimes can affect that stuff. So beyond the color stuff, I know there's a whole lot of reasons that people have things stacked against them. But if you're white, you don't have the color of your skin stacked against you. And that is where that line is. So, look, if somebody's got an experience they'd like to share, talk about how perhaps some of this cumulative effect, crept up on them and presented itself, I'd love to hear from you. So, again, the number is 212-209-2877. I don't know, Reggie, I can't tell when we got somebody lined up or not. So,
not yet, but
right.
I'll let you know.
Does
Okay,
the
all right.
orange
I'll
line
let
up?
you.
Yeah,
Yeah. They're lined
new
up.
studio.
But,
I'm trying to figure it all out.
But I will prep it, and I will let you know when we have calls.
All right. So again, 212-209-2877. That's the number to call to be a part of the show. One of my buddies back home, and I'm not saying it's his original quote, but I think I've heard it before. But he's one of the guys, Ed Schindler. He joins me on my show back home. He one of the things he says all the time, he says, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And the point there is that, yes, when you go through life, look, you're gonna put your finger on a hot stove, you're gonna catch a thorn, you're gonna skin your knee, you're gonna experience pain. You're gonna experience emotional pain. You're gonna experience trauma from bullying, from racism, from all kinds of stuff, abusive people. And we all, I don't care who you are, at some point you are going to have an uncomfortable spot in your life where you're going to feel oppressed, or you're going to feel some injustice. The question is, can you bear that pain and not let it linger with you forever, and demonstrate it as suffering? Now, I think carrying that pain and persevering is one thing. And so when I hear people say, well, Native people or black people, they're always whining about the past. Look, most of us are not talking about suffering from a bygone era or an old injury. When we're talking about some of these injustices, these are things that are happening today. Now, we can bear that pain, and we can persevere in spite of that pain, and many have. And trust me, white people are quick to say, "Well, you got Oprah." You've got Barack Obama. No, some people do persevere in spite of all that stuff, and it's not just those extremes, but the fact of the matter is, we aren't all suffering. I mean, I'm not going to harp on it, but a few people suggested that I was angry because of the the topics that I cover on my show. I'm not angry. I'm just pointing out injustices. I'm just pointing out some of these obvious issues because they're obvious to me. Because when people talk about some of these forms of racism being subtle, they might be subtle to some folks, but it ain't quite so subtle to those of us who experience it.
I think it's way more complex than this. And also, I think that sounds a little pulled up by the bootstrapping.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
I don't agree with in any sense. But the thing is, like, when we're applying all of these, like, well, whatever, he made it through, she made it through, they made it through, we're talking about differences in generations also. So my parents, their attitude was just survive the day, just get by, versus my generation, or how people love to say millennials, which is true. We are actually thinking about how we feel inside of our body. And if we're talking about women, even in my mom's generation, they never got to operate inside of their own body.
No.
And they never got to feel things. So this, like, I don't care about people saying, well, so-and-so did it or whatever, and you can't feel pain, but you have the option to, what was it?
Yeah, suffering. Suffering is optional, but pain is inevitable.
To an extent, because that is applied, and through history, white men have operated that way. It's not applicable for all genders by any means, and they're determining how you deal with your emotions or operate inside of your body, which is definitely not applicable to everybody. And for this generation, my age, 20-somethings, now approaching 30-somethings, we're the ones who are being inside of our bodies and feeling that, and like saying, okay, we're stressed out and we have anxiety. Perhaps because we're living in a capitalist society, perhaps this isn't the best for our bodies, ourselves, or the earth, or the future, and we're the ones asking that question for the first time.
Well, and let's face it, we've seen generations that have suppressed oppression, and that's why we've had 5, 6, 7 generations of Native people who have been complicit in assimilation. And I mean, part of the reason that my generation doesn't speak the language as fluently or as predominantly as even my father's generation is because that generation decided that it wasn't helpful for Native people to learn the language. They made a conscious decision not to teach. And it isn't just because my father was a high steel worker in the city. All my cousins who grew up, back in Ganawage, they didn't speak the language either. None of my father's siblings taught their children to speak Mohawk, to speak Ganyageha.
But I think that's such a common trend with a lot of people who are moving to what is the United States, because the thing is, it's not economical. It's not economical to know your own language in what is the United States. You have to learn to assimilate. You have to learn to straighten your hair.
Well, it's more than it's not being economical. It's persecutable. I mean, the whole idea that if you speak a different language, you can be looked at in such a way, and you can be characterized in such a way.
You will not be treated equal.
Right.
And the priority also is of not your generation, but my parents' generation and different
I've got a daughter older than you.
And
that's
different
okay.
generations, like, well, I'll just say, like, my family, I know that their main focus was being able to provide. So they didn't have hobbies, they didn't have interests. This is how culture also gets lost when your main focus is to be able to feed your kids, have a house, and be able to clothe your kid. Like, when that's your only focus, such things of learning a new language, knowing your cultural, those things can't matter.
Well, so again, I will credit my generation for beginning some of this real self-awareness, because we kind of paved the way for your generation to not feel or to be empowered, to say, no, I do have the right to learn my language. I do have the right to express myself and to present myself in my truer identity. Because we were being shaped by the outside. I mean, my father's generation was very much shaped by the outside, and that was one of the things that my generation, where the sovereignty movement and AIM and all of that stuff came out during my generation, because we said, no, we're not going to take this. We're not going to continue the historical trauma in the same way.
Because also when we're talking about how it impacts is when a lot of folks are coming back from boarding schools, when they checked on their birth certificate, they were checking white, or when they were getting social security numbers. So that's by paper genocide of erasing who you are, what language you are.
Well, there were policies of termination where they
sure.
stopped, even recognizing native peoples and territories. So all of that. All right, we do have a call on the line, and so we'll take this one call before we go to the top of the hour, and then we'll go to more callers after that. But caller, you're up first. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, my name is Rob. I'm from Brooklyn, New York.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for calling.
Hey, how you doing? Hey, a couple of things. Listen, I love your show. Listen, I'm my mother's from Puerto Rico. My dad's from Italy. And just to let you know who I am and what I am. But I do identify with the white community because I was raised in predominantly white communities. Mm-hmm. The one thing I wanted to mention was I listen to a lot of different shows, and when it comes to poverty in this country, and I got this from watching a debate with the Black Caucus, and they were debating, and they were communicating to Biden and Warren at the time. They brought up there's 140 million people that live in poverty in our great country, but 66 million of those people are white Americans. 23 million people are Black Americans. So I understand that there's a lot of privileges in being white in this country, considering the history and all. But you know what? It's not as cracked up as people want to believe, because there's a lot of poor Americans in the country, and includes white Americans.
Well, and I don't debate that. I mean, but again, if you look at those percentages, then the amount of people in poverty are disproportionately Black. I mean, again, if because white people represent more than 2 times the population. I mean, Black people only represent 13% of the U.S. population. So if they represent 23 million of that 60 million. Or compared to 60 million white people, that's still pretty high.
For that, you're not including that's citizens who are enrolled. So the people who have the luxury to be a citizen and who are enrolled have access to Social Security. People who are incarcerated have limited access to certain social services, and which is disproportionately Black and brown people inside of prison. So when they come out, their options are less limited.
No, white doesn't equal wealth, I'm not suggesting that.
I mean, I kind of, and that kind of took an offense in a way, because, me, I was born and raised in a predominantly Puerto Rican neighborhood up until I was 12 years old, and I've watched so many people, especially in the Latin community, grow up in poverty, very poor, including myself. And so, luckily, my father was able to get us out of there, And I'm half white. I mean, at least I consider myself half white. So I kind of take offense, because I don't think being white in this country is as great as everybody's trying to say. I feel that we struggle just as hard. Me, as an American, I wake up every morning, and I hate to say it, I chase money every day of my life, and I pray to God that I'm able to support my family. So I kind of do take offense. Not that I'm saying, listen, I wish all the past didn't happen. I know it happened. But it's so hard for us to make it right when we feel, in a way, that we're kind of being attacked to make it right.
But
what I mean? It's hard not to be offended by some of the things you say, because I feel like I'm part of the struggle. It's not so easy for me.
But
being half white.
You're being part of the struggle or not. There are plenty of poor white people who are struggling, but they still can understand this. The other thing I'll say is that if you're Puerto Rican and Italian and you identify as white, the fact that your shade of skin is lighter grants you an immense amount of privilege. And it doesn't mean that you can't struggle, and it doesn't mean you can't be poor. But when you are lighter, you have immense more privilege. If you trace your Puerto Rican family's background through history, they probably had a lot more obstacles that they had to face than your Italian family did, even though I know Italians were discriminated against at one point, but they were able to assimilate now, and they're a part of a white group.
And you also have the option and the preference to choose to identify as white, which that all by itself says something. All right, hey, Rob, I thank you for the call, though. I really do, and I understand that. I understand how if you are a struggling white person, and let me be clear here, the U.S. foundational documents, they embedded themselves to make sure that a certain level of white people were going to stay poor too. I mean, you didn't get a chance to vote unless you were property owners. There was an aristocracy, a colonial aristocracy that clearly wanted to keep a certain segment of the white population down, but they couldn't distinguish with them by race. And
I will also say, if you can't understand it in terms of race, then think about it in terms of gender. I'm a cis woman and I'm light skinned, so my privilege is insanely wide and vast. But and so if you're saying that you feel offended or guilty, like I can feel the same way as a cis woman, because with that I have immense privilege to navigate spaces as a cis woman. Mm-hmm. But when I was at DJing the other night, and this man kept trying to hit on me, and eventually he asked me, "Oh, I don't mean no offense, but are you a woman?" And I had never been asked that in my life, and I wasn't offended that I was asked that. But what
did the question mean?
He didn't know if I was woman or trans or a man.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
He asked me if I was a woman. And the thing was, and this is when I also realized I have immense privilege as a woman, but here's where it gets tricky, is like, okay, so if I was trans, would you react violently? If I said, yeah, I'm trans, or yes, I'm a man, would this man attack me or be violent in the situation?
Good question.
And that's the thing, is like, I have privilege, but I don't feel offended that the trans community and people of color still need to be heard, and I don't need to be a part of that to understand their issue and their side. So as a cis woman, I know I have way more platforms as a
I'm
DJ.
sorry, I'm not familiar with the expression.
Cis?
Yeah.
It means that your biological parts match your gender identity.
Jeez,
It's the opposite of transgender.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
you're
Right.
a cis man.
All right,
Yeah,
I learned something new. Okay.
So
I'm
that's
gonna
what
write
I'm
this one down.
saying.
Yeah.
That's my whole point, though,
It's
is
the
that
counter. It's the counter. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. It's the counter to transgender, because to let people know that, just like you were saying, transgender is a person that was assigned to the wrong body, where cisgender you're assigned to the body that you feel comfortable
yeah.
with.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So, but this is the same conversation I'm trying to
Right.
say about, just because you're white, you can be offended, but like it doesn't matter, because you have to at some point realize the
You gotta
amount of
recognize it.
privilege
You gotta recognize
that you
it.
have. Just as if I'm in this body as a
And
cis
it's not
woman,
enough
I
to-
have this privilege.
And it's not enough to acknowledge the wrongs of the past. You have to acknowledge that some of the stuff continues. All right, we're a little past top there. We'll take a break here. We'll go out another Murray Porter song from his CD, Stand Up, and we'll come back to more of your phone calls. The number is 212-209-2877. That's the number to call to join Shawnee Rice and John Kane on Let's Talk. We'll be right back after this.
Everybody's different. Everybody is the same. Everybody's got a mother. Everybody's got a name. Never mind the color of another man's skin. We need to see the light that shines from your land. We're all in this thing together. We're all in the same canoe. And if you're gonna make it down that river,
right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane with Shawnee Rice, and we are still in fund drive mode. So I'm gonna pitch it again that I'm asking folks to become a WBAI buddy in the name of Let's Talk. And if you sign up for $10 a month or more, I'll send you a wood carving laser cut wood ornament from Tuscarora Woodworks. My good friend Robert Delamonte produced a bunch of these things for me, specifically for me to do this. And so for $10 a month, I'll send you one of these as a gift, and you can do with it what you like. You can put it on your Christmas tree if you want, hang it on your mantle. You can, put it in a window, whatever you like. Hang it from your rearview mirror if you drive a car, whatever you choose to do. But it's something that symbolizes, has a lot of imagery that I'm connected to in terms of Haudenosaunee. It's got the tree of peace with the eagle on top. It's got the Hiawatha belt across the bottom, and it's all on the back of a turtle shell. So for $20 or more, I would love to send you Murray Porter's latest CD, which is Stand Up. If you are among the first 5 to sign up as a $20 per month WBAI buddy, we'll send you an autographed copy of Murray Porter's CD. A great CD, great music, covering a lot of topics. Not only is the traditional blues with a lot more of a rock feel to some of it, but as with all of Murray Porter's releases, he's got a number of songs that are tied to social issues, and it's clear from not just reading it but just listening to the music. So, all right, we're gonna go back to your calls. One thing I want to mention is, look. Trump just did something to eliminate over 700. I heard 750,000 people will lose their food stamps. And here's the thing: the majority of those people are going to be white. Why? Because most people who are on food stamps, on SNAP benefits, are white. Why? Because there's more white people. When we talk about some of these injustices, a lot of times we're talking about the proportionality. When we talk about death by cop, Native people have a higher rate of death by cop than anybody in all demographics except for the 16 to 22 age group. That's the only demographic. Now, having said that, the total numbers may seem small, especially if you look at it in terms of the total population, because we are a very, very small population. But if you base it on a per 100,000 people, we have a higher rate of death by cop than anybody else, except for in that one demographic. Now, it's not a very big number in the overall scheme of things compared to how many white people die by cop, because you know what? More white people die by cop than black people. But proportionally, black people lead in that one category and come in second behind Native people. Proportionally. But in total numbers, look, white people represent 53% of the American population. And, and they say within the next 10 years or so, they may fall below that 50% mark, the majority mark. But they're still going to be the largest single group, if you were defining people by race. I mean, they're still going to be the largest group. And so when you think about people who are on social assistance, when you think about people who are receiving these SNAP benefits, most of them are going to be are white people. And here's the thing: even though, because the amount of white people that support Donald Trump, even people who are hurt by Trump, farmers, the white poor, they still support him. And why? Because they're going to view, but this is mostly targeting those freeloading immigrants and migrants and black people. That's really the justification for people who even will vote and support somebody against their own self-interest. It's pretty incredible. All right, I just want to throw that out there because I do have to acknowledge that there are more poor white people in the United States than any other group. But proportionally to their overall population, people of color are disproportionately poor.
And also, like, when we're talking about discrimination, race and class go hand in hand.
Yes.
It's really hard to separate it
right along the same lines. Yep.
But when we're talking about discrimination, you're able to separate the two. And so if you are white and you are poor, you are still going to have an upper hand than if you are poor in Muslim or are poor and trans are poor in anything else. Like there's still a segregation line.
All right, let's go right to the phone lines. I know I got at least 3 or 4 people on the line. So, caller, you're up first. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Oh, it's me?
Yeah, it's you.
Cool. How you doing? Cool. My name is Ben, calling from Brooklyn.
Hey, Ben, thanks for calling.
Oh, thank you. I love your show, man. It's beautiful.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, it is true what you said about the welfare. I think it's white women, actually, who the largest recipient of social welfare benefits. But like you said, proportionally, due to ratio, it is more African Americans affected. But
yeah, because there's a lot of single white women trying to take care of who have deadbeat fathers of their kids. So I mean, everybody always wants to try to make this a color thing, right? They want to think it's all black women or and from the native standpoint, that's an assumption too. But you're absolutely right. White women are oftentimes left holding the bag for for deadbeat dads, in total numbers much higher than anybody else, but just not proportionally.
Right. Yeah, but what I want to say too about racism, I think a lot of it possibly has to do with epigenetics and things that are historically a part of the European race in terms of racism. I don't look at racism as anything that's, I mean, quote unquote, it is bad in terms of how it treats people, but a lot of it is survival. Europeans went through the Black Plague. A lot of Europeans got trapped in the Ice Age. So the hyper survival tactics that you see through racism and things like that, it has negative consequences. But I think the school system should incorporate that education into the system, into the curriculum, because apartheid, slavery, the slaughter of Native Americans, those are not isolated incidences. And granted, other races, Japan to China, they do things to other races, but not to the propensity and to the degree in which Europeans do it historically and worldwide,
Wait, why are you bringing epigenetics into it?
Were you saying epigenetics or just genetics?
Epigenetics.
Okay.
Epigenetics. I think that the hyper survival tactics, because racism is about survival. It's about almost guaranteeing the survival of a certain race. And I think the DNA has memory. I don't see why.
I agree with you, and I agree with epigenetics, but I've never really I don't.
Associated?
No, it's not that. It's just it's more. It's how you deal with trauma. So are you trying? I don't get how you're.
No, I see it a little differently. Go ahead, and then I'll add in. Go ahead.
I think that it's not all. Of course, it's not all Europeans, because but I do think that a certain subset of, I guess, the power structure, possibly. I don't know who it is. I don't know if it's a bloodline. I just know that like the different ideologies like Darwinism, survival of the fittest, only the strongest survive. Those don't exist, and I don't think they do. Does that exist in Native American culture? Because I think that the world is people are made to be communal. But when you come in with Darwinism and survival of the fittest, it conflicts with a communal way of living.
So first, I just want to say that there's no Native American culture, that all nations believe in different things. So you can't lump everybody together. We don't speak for all nations. We don't speak for all Native communities. So every nation can think differently about Darwinism, or can think differently about afterlife or spirituality or whatever.
But again, among people who are indigenous and native and have a certain connection with the land, there's a certain commonality to them.
No, and look, and I can I can say, look, Native people do acknowledge that that a weaker species is going to, or the weaker of a species is going to have a survival problem. So we acknowledge that. But no, let me finish. So a couple of things. For one thing, Darwinism is about individual species. It's not about social structures creating a more fit society. That actually defies evolutionary scale. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, what Darwinism is about is whether a species is more fit, not whether they can rig the game and they can adopt a practice that can make them more better survivors because they wipe out all of their threats and that they might face. So that's not what Darwinism is. Because here's the thing, racism is oftentimes part of a weakness, not a strength. I mean, and although what I will say that, look, it was a good play for white. It was a good play for white people to have slavery. It was a good play for white people to massacre Native people. It was good for them, but it's not good for mankind. And so, as a species, then, and that's what Darwinism is about: species. It's not about groups of people dominating other groups. So I don't know. And on the epigenetics thing, there are two parts of this thing. I'm not sure if you're saying that racism is tied through epigenetics, or being victims of racism is tied to epigenetics. Because look, epigenetics does create a certain level of self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because you become so traumatized that it gets into your DNA, and it can create a different response to the whole fight or flight, mechanisms that your body has. So I think epigenetics does play a role in terms of how people either respond to being a racist or being a victim of racism. But I don't think it did. I think it's reactionary. It's causational. Not it has an effect. It isn't the cause of racism.
It's not the cause. I don't know for sure, but my theory is that it's not the cause of. No. I'm saying it's one. Like you said, racism is something that you say it's for the weak. It benefits the weak. You did say that, right?
Well, I said racism is a human weakness. It's not a strength.
But racism is employed by, I don't know if you were saying that, but I would say that racism is pretty much employed by those who are weaker, and they employ racist tactics on those that they want to control.
Yeah, they want to create they want to artificially impose a disadvantage against somebody who isn't disadvantaged, and that's what racism does. So you're right. Yeah, I agree with you there.
I mean, but we're also talking about different. We're saying weaker in what sense? Are we saying weaker in morality? Are we saying weaker economically? Like, we're saying the same thing, but we're talking through different lenses here.
I can say weaker in terms of if race A is if once slavery ended, post-slavery Reconstruction, a lot of black communities were economically prosperous, more so than a lot of their masters at one point in time. So you had the city in North Carolina, I forget the name of it. You had the Rosewoods, you had Black Wall Street.
Yeah, Greenwood. Yeah,
Greenville. So they were destroyed, and there's a reason for that. You can say it was jealousy, but it's racism. That was the reason for that. And economics is just one aspect of society. You got and the only thing, and you see blacks today, things that are censored. You don't see the academic and the scholarly prowess of people of African descent in this country promoted. You see it censored, but you will see things like athletic skills highlighted, things like that.
For sure.
Being athletes is not the only thing that people of African descent would can
excel at.
Excel at, exactly.
For sure.
So
for sure,
racism is a tactic of the weak, and I think it has to do with epigen. I think it's a way of being proactive.
I agree.
I don't want to say the race is weaker. I just say different, because if you look at in animals, you look at albino animals. Albino animals behave differently from those that are not albino. And albino animals don't mate with each other also, because they know naturally that they are the weaker species. So they mate with the ones that have melanin.
But that's a biological
mutation. Yeah, not as much.
Well, it's also like they're operating from.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
If you go far, I mean, yeah.
No.
Last thing I want to say before I get off the phone, I have a daughter who's like 9 years old, so she asked me what is racism.
Ooh.
And I always explain to her. I explain to her the best I can in simplest forms.
Well, and on that definition, though, I think it's important people understand that what racism is the belief that a group of people that can be identified by race have a belief that they are superior to another race simply by virtue of that race. It's a superiority inferiority thing. But racism is also, again, it's systemic. And what makes racism perpetuate isn't just the belief of a few people. It's creating systems that will ensure the imbalance, the inferiority superiority dynamic.
You should also Go ahead. Go ahead. You go ahead.
It's also, racism is also a verb too. You have to implement. You can be a racist. You don't have to even act on it. But when you add that ism part into it, you have to implement those different tactics. You have to have people in certain powers of position,
Right.
to destabilize other races. You know, and it's
Sure.
strategic and it's efficient.
Yeah.
And it's obvious. You know.
Well, I want to thank you for the call. A great conversation, and again, it was good to mix it up with you. Thanks a lot for calling, Ben. I appreciate it. All right, caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, my name's Ken.
Hey, Ken.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing? I'm calling from Manhattan.
Uh-huh.
Appreciate the show. I appreciate the last call. Good conversation. I'm 56 years old, third generation Italian American, and for me, it's very easy to see my white advantage. I prefer advantage versus privilege, the term.
Why?
Well, to me, white privilege almost makes it sound like it's a privilege to be white, whereas white advantage just says what it is. It certainly is an advantage to be white. I wouldn't say it's a privilege to be white. So
I
that's
see
why.
what you're saying. Okay, uh-huh.
Yeah, but go ahead. Go ahead. How do you see it?
Well, I see that a lot of white people, people I know that or say that white advantage doesn't exist anymore, or they don't see it. I think when my grandfather came up in the early 1900s as a white man, yeah, sure, he was Italian, so there was some disadvantage, but he was still a white man. I think what people don't realize is that the connections and the connections that were made over the course of 2-3 generations, the infrastructure that that was set up, and then when I was coming up in the 60s and 70s and 80s, as soon as I get out of my parents' house, all of a sudden those structures that were in place, whether it was a cousin in California that put me up for 2 weeks when I moved out there because they had the same advantages. So money and wealth is built. And I'm not talking about real money. I'm just talking about middle class. So you have a niece and a cousin all over the country. I remember getting a job when I went out to California because my grandfather had helped a man when he came over. Because as a white man, he was able to do that because, and then you have black people who had built this country for already 200 years, but they were not able to participate in building this structure. And, here comes my grandparents coming off the boat, and boom, all of a sudden they're making these structures. And then when I got to New York 30 years ago, it was a friend who I put up, and he put me up. And then I kind of walked into a rent-stabilized apartment that I've been in to this day. No way a black man my age would have gotten that apartment that I got. So the benefit, and not to mention, and not to be comical about things, but the bankruptcies, the credit cards that aren't paid back, the relative that dies, and you get a check, you didn't even know she was alive. These are all things that, I was talking to a friend of mine who's black, and he was like, she didn't understand about bankruptcy. I said, if you never filed bankruptcy, you don't know what you're missing. So
That's Trump.
Exactly. You did it, 4 times? So these are all the, I think, the systemic advantages. But I will say this, in the last 20, 40 years, you now have I'm talking about black, not necessarily Native American, but certainly in the African American community, the black community, with you have now 2-3 generations of wealth that has been created, and ultimately that's what I think will change everything. It's an economic problem more than anything. And, you have like the Oprah Winfrey's, and I know the last caller was saying other than entertainment and athletic prowess, the black community has doctors, lawyers, and everything else. We get that. But that's what I'm saying, that this type of wealth over the generations will, I believe, correct the historical wrong.
Yeah, the problem is you still have an awful lot of people who get left behind and all that. So they're relatively few. And again, I applaud people who can work through adversity and show success. Although when we're talking success here, we're talking about measuring it in dollars and cents, and not necessarily. I mean, there's plenty of wealthy white people whose families are a mess and whose lives are train wrecks. And it's funny when you even talking about things like when you could criminalize drug issues because you could associate them more with people of color. That all changed when the heroin epidemic starts to infiltrate the middle class, not just the wealthy, coke snorters, but that among the white elite. But when middle class white folks started losing their kids to the heroin epidemic, all of a sudden it changed the conversation. So I agree with you that if we ever could get to a place where there was enough of wealth handed down generation to generation, it would equalize. But the problem is when you look at the United States now, in spite of whatever Trump wants to claim is economic success of the country, there is larger income disparity than there ever has been, and also, much of that, as Shawnee said earlier, much of that income disparity runs right along racial lines.
I think also, I agree with you, and if that were to happen in theory, that would be great. But the rate at which we're destroying the planet versus when socially we come around to understand these things will not be at the same time.
Yeah, maybe a moot point. Maybe a moot point.
Yeah.
All right, let me go to the next caller. Caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hello, I am Sharon, and I am calling you from Long Branch.
Hey, Sharon. Thanks for calling and being a part of the show.
Long Branch.
Oh, you're welcome, and thanks for having me. Anyway, I was listening to you. I'm at work now in my car on my way to work. I don't know whether I agree with everything you say, and I found some of the things that you said to be kind of on the negative side. For instance, if I may be allowed,
go ahead.
When you mentioned that most people, or it seems that people, when you hear the word American, the first thing that flashes through their mind is a Caucasian person. I think, those ideas depends on where you come from, how you were raised, and I certainly don't look at it that way. I'm a black American. I think of myself as being American. So I never use the term African American. First of all, an African American to me would be somebody who's new to the United States, maybe just got their citizenship, first, second generation. If you've been here for 12, 13, 14, 15 generations, like a lot of black Americans have been, you're no longer African American, you're just an American.
Point taken.
Your nationality is American, your race is black. African American is denote dual.
You don't think that that's a choice?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Do you think that, isn't that up to the individual, whether you claim
absolutely,
to be
it is.
American or African
I
American?
personally don't understand why someone would, like I said, blacks who have been in the country since, there's many blacks who have been in the country that around slavery times and before who were not slaves, who's been here for many generations. I'm not sure why they would want to call themselves an African American. African American would be, like I said, a dual citizenship,
but
like an Italian American or an Irish American.
The purpose, or at least that I know some of my friends have said, is because slaves were forced here. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't a choice for them to become Americans. They had to become Americans or African Americans because they were brought here because of slavery. So
that part, I can certainly understand that, but that was back then. This is now.
No, but
an African American, I would consider as someone that has would have dual citizenship.
So kind of
came from
semantics.
Africa and came here and got their citizenship recently.
No, and again, a lot of these labels, I've just heard for the first time. I didn't realize that again, this Latinx versus Hispanic versus Chicano. I mean,
Latino.
depending on who you ask, some people reject those labels to be Latin American or Hispanic American, but the media now has grabbed onto this Latinx moniker, and
Well, rightfully so.
well, and I don't know. I guess it depends on what somebody of. And many of these people are indigenous people who just happen to have the Spanish language imposed upon them. So I don't know what the right labels are. As a Native person, I hate being called an American Indian, a Native American, or any of that stuff. I simplify it by just using the word Native. But if I have to specifically define myself, I'm going to use a word in my own language instead of the ones that are being imposed. But the whole point that I'm saying is that when if you whether you're looking at forms that have to be filled out or whatever else, there's an automatic. I mean, when somebody identifies themselves, the first thing they have to do is say, well, I'm not just American. I'm Black American. I'm Native American. I'm African American. I'm Latin American. And the assumption that if you don't have a precursor in front of it, that you're white. So the word American by itself does necessarily it equals white, and I'm not saying I'm not saying this is a matter of scientific fact. I'm just saying in terms of common usages. But
I think it's also important when we're talking like globally.
Yeah.
When you're talking about American, that's usually you're American because you're white, and you're American because you have power and you have money. That's how Americans are viewed, and that's when you think America or American, you're thinking of the red, white, and blue.
Yeah.
You're thinking of July 4th. You're thinking of football games and all of those sorts of things.
Canadians aren't considered Americans. They're considered Canadians, even though it's the same continent. The United States is a country. It's America isn't one. But no. And look, I know that some of the things that I say are going to be that are going to challenge somebody's
abrasive.
They're what they view as their own conventional wisdom. But I try to be pretty honest about it. I don't know if there was anything else that I said that you thought whether it was negative or not is it's kind of neither here nor there. But whether it was inaccurate, I don't know if there was anything else. All right. Okay. All right. I guess she's gone. We'll go to the next caller. Caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Oh, hi, it's Joan from Manhattan.
Hey, Joan,
Hello.
Thanks for calling.
Hi, thank you. You mentioned the issue of the SNAP cuts, the food stamp cuts that are coming down now.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it reminded me of something I heard. I heard a news report on Thanksgiving, and it was quite shocking, really. There was a little clip of Mayor Bloomberg, Michael Bloomberg, trying to become our president.
Yeah.
And he went to a soup kitchen. He went to a soup kitchen and doled out some soup to some people, and he gave them some care packages. They described them as care packages. I don't know what was in them. I can't imagine what could have been in them that was worthy of a man with $44 billion. But that's beside the point. He came on the air, and he said he was very proud of doing this. He thought it was a wonderful thing that he did, great sacrifice. He said, for those of us who have more, that are privileged, we need to give something back. And I guess he thought that giving an hour of his time in a soup kitchen and giving a few care packages to a few people was giving something back. So, it's shocking to me that he would even not have any shame without saying that. So I have a suggestion. I have a modest proposal for Mayor Mike, and I'd like to make it now an open radio letter to Mayor Mike. You say you want to run for president. You want to defeat Donald Trump. Well, you can start now. You don't have to wait for anybody to vote for you. You can start this afternoon. And what you could do is you could donate, I'd say maybe $1 billion to local soup kitchens and food pantries, in New York, your old city, to help defeat Donald Trump, who is trying to, basically starve people. And you could endow his food kitchen, pantry in the city with money in perpetuity. You could even send them some counselors, investment counselors.
Also,
if you know anything, you know about investing money, and you could tell them where to put the money so they will get a good return on the investment, and they will be able to help people forever, no matter what Washington does. What do you think?
I agree, and I
Great
think
idea.
I think it's also really cute that he volunteered for an hour at a soup kitchen, which is the most basic concept of when you're talking about volunteering. And I would, it's important. People need to eat, but also when you are at such status politically and economically, use your power in policy. And use your power economically. Like it does, showing up to a soup kitchen, I mean, great. Don't stop doing that. But
that's what you do if you're working class and you want to give something to other people less well off than you. You think, I'll go to a soup kitchen, I'll help people out. But when you have he has $44 billion. He is the 13th richest man in the world, according to Forbes. He can do a hell of a lot better than care packages. And he was proud of it. He didn't see anything shocking or shameful about it.
Those 13 men could eliminate poverty if they wanted to, if they were really that committed to it. So it is disingenuous when you see somebody do these kind of token gestures. And he also apologized for stop and frisk, I think. Although he didn't apologize, he was Bloomberg was the mayor at the time when he was suggesting that David Patterson, who was a blind governor, go out to Seneca territory and stand on the thruway with a cowboy hat and a shotgun and tell the Senecas who's boss. That was some of the stupid. That was Bloomberg. You can look it up. New York Post. Bloomberg to Patterson. You can find it. In fact, I just shared the link on Facebook. Yeah, he literally suggested that he obviously couldn't even get the metaphor right. He didn't say six gun with it. He said shotgun with cowboy hat. Blind black governor with a cowboy hat and a shotgun standing on the thruway to tell the Senecas who was the law of the land is basically what
was the Seneca doing at that point that he was objecting to?
This was all Bloomberg's war against natives selling cigarettes.
Oh, cigarettes.
Yeah, so he took it from beyond what was happening in Long Island, but he wanted to make a direct attack against the Senecas.
What is the issue there? They're allowed to sell cigarettes without paying tax? Is that the issue?
Well, we're not taxable by the state. So the fact is that if somebody buys cigarettes from a native land, whatever tax liability they may have is on them. It's not on us to either collect the tax but here's the other thing that people don't and I'll throw this in there. In New York State, according to their tax code, every resident of New York can buy up to 2 cartons of cigarettes with no tax liability. So that generally people will recognize that if they go to out of state to buy 2 cartons of cigarettes. But guys like Bloomberg was directly opposed to Native people being able to sell to non-Native people who lived out of the state. So that was some of his racist comments. I agree. I'd love to see him throw $1 billion to help the hungry and to help the poor. But I agree with the open letter.
You have to do it through soup kitchens because that's kind of a last resort. People really want to eat the food they want and cook the way they want.
No, but a lot of people have food in their home is much more a much better circumstance.
Some sort of organization that people could. I don't know. There's a way to do this. He's a smart guy. Anybody who can turn $4 billion into $44 billion in less than 20 years is a smart guy, and he knows his way around. He could do a lot.
Also, if you're running for president, theoretically, you should be able to figure it out.
Yeah. And if you can't, then you shouldn't be running for president, nor should the last guy who won. But, Joan, thanks a lot for the call. I appreciate it. All right. Let me go to a couple of more callers here. Caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hello, this is Walter from Queens.
Hey, Walter. Thanks for calling.
Hi. I'll admit I got to the program late, so I didn't hear your opening comments. So I'm more responding to people who've called in the time I've been listening. First off, it's a great conversation. But I'm going to go back to the conversation about racism, Darwinism, and epigenetics.
Sure.
The problem, and it goes back to kind of what you were mentioning with forms. Race and species is very different.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when you import one into the other, it adds a reality to the whole conversation that it doesn't have.
You're right, exactly.
The white race and the black race and this race do not exist scientifically.
No, exactly.
They are phenotypical differences of one species.
Mm-hmm.
And
so
that's kind of why I felt like
impacts
I had
more than anything, right?
Exactly. So this is one thing I felt I had to say.
Sure.
Because it's kind of a victory of racism that it feels like it's straight up science.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or it was
So-
conveniently written as a narrative that it is scientific. Yeah.
Because also, even invoking Darwinism to talk about social structure was done at his time, and he hated it because he was specifically talking. Whoops. Sorry about that. That's my car.
It's okay.
He was specifically
Is somebody
talking
stealing your
about
car?
species. No, I opened my door without turning off my alarm.
All right.
So that was my fault. But he's specifically talking about how, species are differentiating. There's no better or worse or weaker or stronger. My favorite example was of moths that were white with black spots, and then coal mining happened, and coal furnaces changed the trees to black with white spots, so the white ones were eaten, and the ones that were black with white spots survived and thrived. So,
Sure.
we are constantly evolving because of the pressures on us. And if you're going to give those pressures real-sounding names, it gets very dangerous because you can't then talk about it as if it's a social structure created by man. It's something in the world that made it so. So we have to fight the world, not bad practices by people.
Are you a scientist?
Many, many things. But I work in a school, and I was actually part even of the DOE's implicit bias trainings that start a really great conversation about this.
Yeah.
Because I do think these conversations are important. If we can't
sure.
talk about these in a civilized way, even the caller before who disagreed with you or felt whatever, if she doesn't have a space to say that, as a culture, we can't move forward in these
I agree. And that's why we do the show, because obviously I don't want people just to call up to agree. I do like having the conversation. And I appreciate your contribution to that, because absolutely understanding that when I talk about race, I'm not supporting the notion that race even exists. I mean, it was once said that prior to being able to travel quickly, if in any place on the planet, if you could walk, you would see such subtle changes between the features of a human being that they would almost be imperceptible. It's only because when you can cross a large body of water that separated people or being able to travel quickly that all of a sudden now you have people who have had generations, sometimes thousands of years of environmental impact on their melanin content, on their height and their physical shapes and that kind of stuff. That's where some of these physical characteristics, they're shaped by environment, not by not as much by biology all in of itself. So I appreciate the call. All right, caller, you're up next. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Zora. I'm calling from Brooklyn.
Is it Zora? Zora or Dora?
Zora with a Z.
All right, great, Zora. Thanks for calling.
Yes, thank you. So I want to say that language is very important. I mean, I think it can be a very strong tool of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
The gentleman just said that, race is a construct of man. So why do we need that construct? Why are we not just human beings?
Exactly.
Because we need to make these distinctions so that we can use this to differentiate ourselves and oppress people. And it's just even the term. Every time I hear someone say slaves, talking about Africans and their ancestors, our ancestors that were brought to this country and other countries in the world. It's like, no, we were not. We were not slaves. We never were slaves. We were captives. We were prisoners. Whether it was us ourselves or our ancestors, they didn't have there was no choice there. We didn't become slaves. We were people who were captured and imprisoned.
That's a great point.
Because even that language, it hurts, and it's not true. It's not true, and it makes us lesser. Just to even say that we had that history of slavery, it's like, no, we were not slaves. That's not who we were. We were great people. We had language. We had everything. These people actually physically captured us on threat of death. On threat of death. This is what they did to us. And so, from that history, this is where we are today, because the language is there to keep us oppressed. Everything. Just yesterday, I was watching something on TV, and it's a movie, Black Christmas. Everything that is associated with something negative is black, whereas everything that is associated with something good and pure is white. So it's not just semantics, and it's not just we can just say whatever we want, and this terminology, we can't allow this terminology to continue. Majority, minority. Why do we even need to make that distinction? Why? Because you want to put something in the culture, in everybody's subconscious that, some people are greater than the others. So I would say that, we need to ourselves change the language that we're using. And when we hear people use certain phrases in certain language, we just say, no, we need to do something different, because I feel like that's really a tool that keeps us oppressed, keeps us differentiated, and it's not random, and it's not just, happenstance that language formed that way. This was used as a tool, and it continues to be used that way. And I want to say to all of my brothers and sisters and my people who are under this oppression, people don't understand that, we're carrying this extra burden. Everybody lives their life. We have ups and downs with our families, our work, everything. We all suffer what every human being suffers. But, some of us, we have this extra burden that people don't even see, that we don't even see sometimes. We don't acknowledge that, this burden is on us where this society oppresses us. I went to Japan recently, and I mean, my personal experience was great, but there were many people who, before I even went there, said, you're going to face a racism there because, people have these stereotypes about black people all over the world and so forth. It's like, my daughter, she wants to go study abroad, and she said to me, I think I want to go to Australia. But, know what? On second thought, they said people in Australia are very racist. It's like, why do we have this burden to carry that we have to consider someone else's inferiority? Because, frankly, they're the ones that are inferior. If you're going around and you cannot accept a human being for being a human being, I'm sorry, but you're the one who's inferior. It's your problem, your burden to carry, not mine.
Absolutely.
I got to tell you, I'm so glad you have mentioned so much of what you've said here, including this idea of letting labels try to identify us or identify our past. And I agree with you wholeheartedly.
I think,
great commentary. I appreciate your comments.
Also, like when the caller, I don't remember what it was, Ken maybe a while back was saying he prefers advantage to privilege, is because I'm hoping that what he meant was, by when we're saying privilege, we're buying into this idea that being white is such a blessing and such a privilege. So when we stop using that word, we can then apply privilege to all races, and it means that we're all worthy and it's a blessing to be whatever you are, and he means advantage more objectively of like, yeah, I'm white and I have way more advantages. So at first I winced, but then I hope that's what he meant by
I think but again, for the most part, if you look up the in a thesaurus, you're going to see that advantaged and privileged are they're kind of the same thing. They're much the same way. They're used in they may have some different usage, but the meanings are pretty much the same. All right, I'm going to go to one more caller, and then I gotta call it quits because I got to get out of here. But I also want to do one final comment before we go. So caller, you're up next and you're up last. So what's your name? Where are you calling from? There you go, caller. You there? Did we lose him? All right, caller, you're up next, and that makes you last. So what's on your mind? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, Jacob from Williamsburg. How are you?
Hey, Jacob.
Hello.
Listen. Adam was the first man, and God created one man. It says in the Talmud, God created only one man, so that nobody could say my grandfather is better than yours. In other words, anti-racism. And Adam was the most perfect human being who ever existed, and all of our genes stem from him. No man is better than another because we all come from one man, and that's what it says in the Talmud. And I agree with you about the spreading out of the imperceptible changes among people as you go out across towards the Pacific and over into America. The people spread out at the time of the Tower of Babel, and mankind spread out all over the world, and different subsets of the genealogy went to different places. And if anyone could doubt that this is possible, people can intermarry, and you will get new recombinations that approach the level of Adam going backwards. All men are from one man. There is no such thing as a better race.
Well, and again, beyond the religious origins of your story, you're wherever people come out on that stuff. The point being is that we can genetically we can trace ourselves back to a relatively narrow group of human beings. So,
or a species.
So as a species, that's just science. I mean, and so the idea that people have tried to create this sense of superior races over inferior races and all that other stuff. It again, that is a man-made construct, and there's no question about that. The question is, how do we get out of systems that have been built upon that stuff? And the whole point of the show that I was trying to make is that these systems that were built on this stuff. I mean, it was the foregone conclusion that white people were superior by the founding fathers of the United States, by Europeans. That they believed that they reconstructed and manipulated scientific data to even back that theory up. You don't have to go very far back in American history to where white supremacy, L. Frank Baum in one of his genocide editorials talks specifically about the white man being the superior, the lord of the lands and that kind of stuff. So there's no question that this has been a part of the imperialism of America. So the point is, how do we get past it? And we can't just assume, well, that's all just in the past, that there's no lingering effects. The reason I wanted to do this show was to talk about the fact that some of those effects are still there. It isn't just about burning crosses on people's lawns and waving Nazi flags and wearing white hoods and that kind of stuff. That's white supremacy in that form is easy to identify. And it's easy to address that. I think if Reggie and I talked about this. I wish everybody who felt that way would put a flag out so we knew where we stood with people. But the problem is, when you look at what corporate America has control over, how much of our lives are being dictated by who the educators are, who the law enforcement is, who are the lawmakers, who are the people filling our heads in the public media. It hasn't evolved as far. To put to bed all that racism. So look, again, Jacob, I appreciate the call. Look, I do want to do a final pitch here before we rush out of here. We do have a show that comes in after ours. I am advocating that people become WBAI buddies, that people make a donation to WBAI. We are still in fund drive mode, and we will be almost through the rest of the year because of what we went through in our recent past year. So I am encouraging people to make a donation of any size. Go to our pledge line. You can go to 516-620-3602. Make a pledge of any size. You can go to our website, which is www.give2wbai.org. There you can make a one-time donation. You can make a text donation. You can become a WBAI buddy, which is one of the things that we're trying to push. If you become a WBAI buddy to the tune of $10 a month, I'd be happy to send you a Tuscarora Woodworks hanging ornament for your mantle, for your wall, for your tree, whatever you want to put it on. It is it's got some iconic symbols like the Tree of Peace. With its white roots aren't on there, but the Tree of Peace, the Hiawatha belt, the turtle's back, that's for $10 or more. If you go for $20 or more, we'd be happy to send you a copy of Murray Porter's stand-up CD. The first 5 buddies who sign up for $20 or more will send you an autographed copy of his CD. A great music. I feature it here on the show a lot, so you're somewhat familiar with it. And that's what we're looking for. So again, I want to thank you guys for listening to the show, and we won't be here next week, but we will be here the following week, and we'll see you then. This is John Kane with Johnny Rice and Yahweh.
Oh no.
I'm so in love, it's crazy.